I'm Rita Peterson with Everything Homemade, and this is the first video to a rhubarb series that I'll be posting for the next couple of weeks. And I figured the first video we should go over how to grow rhubarb, how to harvest rhubarb, and how to freeze rhubarb in the freezer, as freezing it is one of the most common preservation ways of preserving rhubarb and using it in the winter months. So I'm going to go through the basics, and then the following video we're going to basically do a recipe, a video. Some videos will have a couple of recipes. If I'm going to be using sort of the same concept, I'm going to clump them in together. So let's start with growing rhubarb. Rhubarb plants really like rich, fertile soil that has a lot of manure in it, that it can really pull because it's a heavy feeder. It's really important to feed your rhubarb plants every spring. So growing rhubarb is actually quite simple, but there are certain things rhubarb really likes over some other things. So let's kind of compare things and so you understand what rhubarb likes. Rhubarb does not like heat that much. So the best time that rhubarb grows is actually in the spring. Early summer is its main growing period, and that's when we also have the harvest. So rhubarb harvest happens before most any plants that will be ready, which is kind of nice. So you don't have your entire garden, or you're not berry picking when rhubarb is ready. The other thing to consider is where you're planting it. It does like sun, but not the hot summer sun. So I have mine quite open, as you can see here, but it does get shade by this big tree right up here. So this tree gives it some nice afternoon shade. The other thing is I do have a tree planted over here that will be quite big, so it will be basically partly shady here for it, and it does appreciate a break from the heat. So if you're thinking about it, it would like morning sun and kind of the early midday sun, but that really hot middle of the day sun is not so favorable for rhubarb. The other thing to consider is soil. It is a heavy feeder. It likes rich soil. It doesn't really care for really sandy soil. If your soil is mostly sand, that is not very great for rhubarb to grow. Our soils here are heavy clay soils, and it does phenomenal. We also, it's a good idea to give it manure every spring. Just make sure it is not hot manure. And so we just put that around the plant. I'll rake it in around the plant, and it will give that boost for the rhubarb. This year, it has been super awesome conditions for rhubarb to grow. It has been warm, but also cool at the same time. We had some really warm weeks, but last 3 weeks have been fairly cool considering. And it has been rainy. Rhubarb loves moisture. Now it does not like to be just bogged down in moisture, but it does like rain. And so on hot spring, we literally have to give about 2 of these buckets for every single plant if we are not getting enough rain. This year it's been raining every single day, and we actually, today is the first day in a while that it has not rained yet today, and that's an awesome time to film. So this is the best conditions for rhubarb. Now if you can't meet some of these, I mean, it is a versatile plant, but those are the optimal conditions for it. And I mulch it, so if you can see here underneath the rhubarb, I do have some mulch keeping the ground cool and keeping the moisture in. So let's understand a little bit about this plant. So in the center here, you'll notice that there are some brand new leaves coming. And you notice the stalks here. Now it's the stalks that we are going to be consuming. The leaves are very poisonous. Do not eat the leaves. One of the first things when my kids learn how to walk and understand outside, they learn that rhubarb leaves are poisonous. So that is also very, very important to know. The other thing with rhubarb leaves, you can make an awesome insecticide and fungicide out of them. So I'll be showing that to you and how to make a tea out of rhubarb leaves. The other thing is, when you harvest rhubarb, you don't want to harvest everything. But what I notice is there's a lot of new shoots coming, and so I'll literally, my first harvest, I will literally harvest probably about 95% of the plant, and all these new shoots will come and grow up nice and big. The other thing about growing rhubarb is once in a while they have a seed head. You see the seed head right here? You want to make sure that you take off that seed head. Get rid of it, because it'll make the rhubarb bitter and it'll put the energy into that seed head. So you want to just rip it off. The other thing, it can come up here, so I'm just rip it out. You don't want your rhubarb to go into seed at all. So anytime you see a seed head, just rip it out. So what we're going to do is we're going to harvest this first one, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So what do you need to harvest? Well, I usually have a bucket, and I usually have a sharp knife. Okay, so the easiest way to harvest is literally taking your hand right down below here and just pulling. Now when you pull it out, this is what it looks like. This is where it was connected to the plant. And what I like to do outside is just make a nice little pile, and I just cut it off. And then I take the other side and I just hit it right off, and there you go, and I just put it in my bucket. So again, I put my hand down here. If I put it up here, I'm more likely to break it in half. If I'm going down here, watch right here. And I'm just pulling, and it just comes off that simple. Then I take my knife and I cut off that end, and I cut off that end, and I put it in the bucket. And so I'm just going to do the exact same thing, taking off the ends, and again. And this one here, this part isn't that good, but I'll cut that off in the house. Now these little skinny ones right here, you see how small they are? I'm going to leave those. I am just after the big stalks, like this. And I got a couple in here. This one ripped off a little bit. And sometimes you rip off a little bit of the stalks, the new shoots. And again, I'm just going to and sometimes when you hit it, it doesn't come off as nice. No big deal. Some of these green ones don't cut as nice. Take a look at the plant now. Take a look at that little plant compared to all the rest here. Okay, now it is so tiny, isn't it? So let's go through this. So what I've done is I have left these smaller stalks. One, because they're really tiny and they don't need to be cut, and that helps with the plant to still have some greenery. I noticed that there's a little bit of a flower head here. I'm just going to take that out. I'm just going to clean this plant off a little bit more. And I'm going to actually cut this flower shoot right off. Discard that. And everything looks pretty good. So this will actually all grow up, and usually if you have a good season with rhubarb, you usually can get 2 or 3 harvests off of it. So anytime I got leaves like this, I will just clean up the plant. I'll clean up the dead a little bit around it so it doesn't attract slugs, and I will go with that. And otherwise, that's how I would harvest it and leave. I noticed that there's a couple of bigger stalks here. Let's see, there's a couple of short, bigger ones. I'm just gonna rip those out. And yeah, so I'll cut those ones up. Otherwise, that looks really good. And I missed a couple of those. So after that is done, I have my bucket full of rhubarb. Now, it is dirty. So there is some dirt on it, so it'll need to be washed in the house. But this is going to make our very first recipe. On the next video, we're actually going to use this rhubarb. Now, when we take it in the house, you need to wash it, you need to clean it. But what if right now I get called away and I have my rhubarb I just cut, and suddenly I can't go and clean it or chop it and freeze it? What do I do? Very simple. What you want to do is take your bucket. Here, what you want to do is organize your rhubarb so all the freshly cut ends are down. So any of the short pieces are down. Just kind of loosen up the bucket, let things fall into place, just like so. And then what you want to do is fill your bucket half full with water, and the stalks will absorb the water, and therefore keeping the flavor, letting it not dry out. And I've even had rhubarb sit overnight and get to cutting it the next day because I've been pulled away. So that is a very important thing to know, to understand, that you can actually do that if you can't for some reason chop it up. Or what if you're getting rhubarb from a friend and they don't have time to chop it, but they have time to cut it down and bring it to you the next day? That's exactly one of the best methods. I have done it before, even to my parents. Bring them a big bucket of rhubarb the following day. Just make sure that it has some water in it. Now, another word of advice here. All these leaves are awesome for the compost pile. They are not animal food. It's not good for animals to eat this rhubarb. Like I said, it is a toxic leaf. So discard it into the compost pile. Does awesome there to get rid of it. So let's say you do not have any rhubarb at the moment and you want to find it. What's the best way to go about finding it? Well, there's a couple things. One, if you know a friend, family member, your neighbor, it is so easy to get a root. You only need a little piece of root and you can start. All of these plants were started by small little roots put in the ground. So if you can get somebody, put a Facebook ad on. If you are in the States, go to Craigslist. If you're in Canada, Kijiji, anything like that. Hey, wanted rhubarb. There is hundreds of people with rhubarb. I prefer the red varieties because they're sweeter over the green stalks. Like some rhubarbs are pure green and some are red. I really like the red, and I love when you're cooking with the red rhubarb, I love the beautiful color of it. So actually all of this rhubarb here is an old variety heirloom that I actually got from a friend. And same thing, by its roots. And take a look down here. I'm just gonna kind of dig away here. And they got a really heavy root system. It's kind of like a tubers underneath. And basically you can split the plant. So like that's one plant there, This is another plant, so you can actually split these, and it's really good to split your rhubarb once in a while also. And okay, so it's really important too to thin out your rhubarb. This is only the second year. I planted this last year and I didn't harvest at all. So you don't want to harvest the first year either. So when you plant your rhubarb in, you don't want to harvest it that year. You want the plant to get its roots into the ground, to grow, to give it a chance to establish itself. Anytime I plant a herb, especially a perennial, I always give it the first year. I don't do anything with it. I don't harvest at all, and just let the plant grow. That way it gets a really strong root base and it is completely ready for the following year. The other place, let's say you can't find a friend or a neighbor or anyone, many seed catalog places will sell rhubarb seed or a root stock of rhubarb, and you can order it also from there. The other thing that we should go over is, okay, you've planted your rhubarb. What kind of things can you do with rhubarb? Well, there's actually lots, and rhubarb is very inexpensive, and once you got rhubarb, you can grow tons of plants of it depending on your space. But what I really like to do with rhubarb is I consider it a very, very cheap sort of berry, so to speak. So I throw it in anywhere where I would, let's say, throw in the blueberries or strawberries. So if I can make muffins and I don't have strawberries or blueberries or some kind of nice berry, rhubarb makes an excellent choice. You can substitute rhubarb in to make any kind of crisp. So you can do half rhubarb, half blueberries, or some rhubarb and strawberry. So it really bulks dishes up where, let's say, you don't have so much of an expensive berry or an expensive fruit, where you can add in rhubarb to bulk it, where you don't need so much, because rhubarb really will take on the flavors that you will put to it. And it has its own flavor, but it actually enhances other flavors at the same time and really bulks things up. Sort of kind of like acts like a zucchini in a way, but zucchini has a little less flavor, but again, you use zucchini as a bulking squash. And so rhubarb really works in that sense. The other nice thing with rhubarb is it makes awesome sauces. Absolutely beautiful sauces over pancakes. It makes wonderful jams, again, as a bulking plant in there. It makes an awesome insecticide and fungicide from the leaves. It's really healthy for you too. So don't forget all the health benefits of rhubarb. Rhubarb makes awesome jams. I have never made wine from it, but I have known lots of people who have. It makes wonderful wine, and maybe someday I'll get into that. I also have a recipe with rhubarb vodka that it's really nice that way. I grew up on rhubarb juice, and I'm going to actually show you some of that. So there is a ton of things you can make from rhubarb, and I got some other really creative ideas on how to use rhubarb that's outside the box, where normally when people say, hey, I'm growing rhubarb, you want it for cakes and muffins and crisps. But what about rhubarb barbecue sauce? Instead of using tomatoes, what about using rhubarb? How about sorbet? How about ice cream? How about rhubarb juice? Things like this, the more ways you can use it, the better it is. And rhubarb is so inexpensive to grow, so easy to harvest, with so many health benefits that I really think it's overlooked on the big spectrum of plants to grow on your property. And I think rhubarb needs a little bit more attention and respect. I'm here to give you some wonderful ideas on how to use this easy to grow plant that everyone should have at least one of these plants in their garden. So let's go inside. Let's take this bucket. Let's clean up this rhubarb. Let's chop some of it up, and I will show you how to freeze it. I have my bucket here, and I just pour it in my sink. And I'm just basically going to give it a quick rinse off. And I'm going to use cold water. And I'm just going to wash it up because really it just has some dirt on it. And that's what I'm washing off here. It's just the dirt. So it's kind of like that. Get a nice little rinse off. And sometimes I fill up my sink right here too, and I just give it a swish of water, and that's how easy it is to clean. Okay, so off to the table we go. Okay, now that we are here at the table, this is how simple it is to chop it up. So basically, very basic things. Cutting board, sharp knife, it's gotta be a sharp knife, a bowl, a scooper of some kind, and a bag. So I'm gonna chop it up like you would do for many recipes, but I'm also gonna show you how to freeze it. So basically, what's important is we did cut off the ends. Now I'm looking at stuff like this. I'm just gonna make my ends a little better. This one, it was a freshly cut end, so I'm not worried about that. And basically, you just go ahead and you chop it up. So that's about how big I'm doing it. Sometimes it's a ½ an inch, sometimes a little smaller. In all honesty, I just go. Now, the other cool thing with rhubarb is that sometimes, let's say you're chopping with it up, and if it doesn't go in smoothly, if you just rotate the rhubarb, there's always a side that is easier to chop than others. Why? I am not sure. But ever since I chopped rhubarb as a child growing up, and here, if you got a side where you your knife goes down, you're like, oh man, gotta cut it. Just turn it. And there will always be an area that is simple to cut. Now, this particular stalk is simple to chop, okay? So basically I do that, put it in a bowl. Now when you get nice and fast at it, I like doing more pieces at once. And you'll notice that rhubarb kind of peels the skin a bit, and some of these I just throw off to the side and we just put in the compost bucket. It's no big deal. That's just a characteristic of the rhubarb. Again, these ends here have been freshly cut outside because I'm doing this right away, and I am just going to go chopping. And when the rhubarb doesn't get as big, it's easier to chop. When you got huge stalks, you know, something like this, and especially the green variety are sometimes harder to chop than the red ones. Again, I'm not exactly sure, but that's just what I find over the years of working with rhubarb. Okay, so basically it is that simple. So we're gonna chop it up, put it in the bowl, and either use it fresh like we're going to do today, or freeze it. So when you freeze it, all you have to do is put it in the bag. How simple is that, you guys? No fuss. So all you would do is take your bag, take your rhubarb, put it in the bag, fill up the bag until it's full. So with the bag full, this is how I freeze it. I get a straw and I fill it up. I close it up a bit, but I leave the end a little bit open. Then I insert the straw and close up the bag around it, and I'm going to suck out the air. That way, and then I just flatten it. So when I put it in my freezer, I put bags on top and they freeze flat. That way when I lift it up, they're all frozen, nice and flat on each side, so it saves space in the freezer. So there's the first bag ready for the freezer. When you got recipes that call for rhubarb, you don't want to thaw out your rhubarb. You want to make your muffin batter or make your cake batter and just throw in the frozen rhubarb. You can break it up frozen, but throw it in because it thaws really quick. Kind of like blueberries. It is easier to mix your batter with frozen blueberries than it is to thaw it. Same kind of concept with rhubarb. Exactly the same. And it freezes so well. I've had rhubarb frozen in the freezer over winter and used the old stuff up. It does awesome. So now you know how to grow it, how to harvest it, and how to freeze it. The next step is the fun part, how to use it in delicious recipes that will blow everyone away that you have used rhubarb. We'll see you on the next video. Hi, I'm Rita Peterson with Everything Homemade, and this is the first video on Hi.